In this chapter, the authors focus on the fact that when we're designing an assessment, whether it's formative or summative, we have to, as teachers, think about, well, what is the purpose of the assessment? Am I trying to figure out where my students are at and what more they need to move them forward in a more formative way? Or am I trying to decide that whether or not my unit of teaching, whether they got it or not, sort of in a more summative way? So there's three types of assessment: diagnostic, formative, and summative. And in this chapter, the authors are going to focus more on formative and summative. So really focus on clarifying that in your mind. What is the purposes of formative assessment? What are the purposes of summative assessments? And there's a pretty nice table on page 21 that might help as well, thinking about some of the differences between those two types of assessment. Diagnostic assessments are those assessments that we would give before teaching to figure out our students' prior knowledge so that we don't reteach things that our kids already know. Diagnostic assessments could also be used for placing students in special programs, is another thing that we associate with diagnostic assessment. So the primary difference between formative and summative is we can think about formative assessment in terms of something that's going to provide us with information for improving our teaching, for improving our students' learning and informing what we need to teach next. And formative assessments can be formal, meaning that you're just going to stop what you're doing and like give a quiz. That could still be formative, but it's more formal. Or they can be informal, like having a discussion with a child, question and answer to figure out what they know. Summative assessments are usually given like at the end of a unit or even the end of your grade to determine whether you have mastered what was taught. And so in the chapter, they talk about supporting learning for formative versus verifying or certifying learning for summative. Okay. So formative assessment is when you're cooking something and you taste the soup and you can fix it if it needs fixing, unless you put too much salt in it, in which case you can't take that out. Or summative is when you give your food to somebody else and then they're going to say whether it was fabulous or not. Again, formative, how am I doing? Where do I need to go? Summative, how did I do? Is sort of more on the judgment side. And you're usually probably going to be assigning some type of a grade at that point. Now, both formative and summative, well, actually, summative assessments are typically always formal, but formative assessments could be either one. So when I say formal assessment, that means that you're not teaching right then. You're really putting a pause on instruction. You're planning it out in advance. Now, I would say we really need to be planning our formative assessments as much as we can. But, part of teaching is constantly formatively assessing our students. So a lot of that is done in the spur of the moment. Anyway, so formal assessments are things that we plan in advance. We stop our instruction to do them. And those could be like a quiz, a presentation, a graded homework assignment, things like that. That would be more formal in nature. And then informal is occurring while we're instructing, and that could be like a question answer session, observation, asking a child to talk through their reasoning on something along those lines. Formative assessment, we're going to be able to use those results very quickly to adapt our instruction and figure out what we need to teach next, or figure out how we need to group students, things like that. And then students should also be able to use formative assessment to set goals, to figure out what they're doing well and what they need to work on. So an emphasis throughout this text is that we need to involve our students in self-reflection and involve them in the assessment process, and that's all part of formative assessment and can also be part of summative assessment as well. So formative assessment still needs to be aligned to our learning targets, and this is something that we're going to be coming back to again and again. We have to think about what is the purpose behind the assessment, what are we trying to ask our students to learn, and that's what our assessment should go towards. The items or tasks should obviously relate to the content and should provide enough detail or feedback to the teacher so that you as a teacher get some information that will be useful for you. It should also provide the students with a chance to self-assess, understand like what things they understood or not. And you need to get that information back to the students in a timely manner so that you and your students are able to take action. With summative assessment, sometimes teachers design their own summative assessments and they can be used to inform learning. But for things like end of grade assessments, those are going to be useful for future classes of students. So it's really more of an evaluation of student learning rather than a support of students. Okay, on page 28 of our text, the authors provide 7 strategies for formative assessment, which they call assessment for learning. So the 7 strategies are making sure that we have clear learning targets, providing examples of strong and weak work, providing descriptive feedback that's useful for students, and getting students involved in self-assessment and goal setting. And then finally, in terms of closing those gaps between where I'm going and where I am currently, we need to take that information to design targeted lessons and teach students how to focus on revising their work if they need to. And again, engaging students in self-reflection. So that's my overview for this chapter. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to talking this chapter over with you in class. Thank you.